To fight aloud. Overview. The reintegration of the Sword Scholars to Urizen and the wider Empire has never failed to be eventful. In the most recent development, the Sword Scholars split into two factions. One group who decided to forego the teachings of Suleiman that some claim invoked the malign spiritual force of purity and stay aligned with the Empire. Many of these scholars now hold high office in the imperial bodies of state. The other group, under the nominal leadership of Severus of the Blinding Sun, chose to withdraw from the Empire and remain committed to what they believe are the true teachings of Suleiman Itaziel. Facing the risk of execution should imperial law catch up with them, most have gone into hiding in the Urizen Mountains. A tension had grown in the mountains, one that could only last so long before something broke it. Last summit, a decisive blow was made that has completely unravelled the disciples. Judgment. The disciples of Suleiman have been driven out of Urizen. Some have gone down fighting, unwilling to surrender their beliefs to the Empire's edicts. Those who have not been killed have been forced to flee. Several hallowed items have been recovered from the defeated disciples. In the autumn of 387 YE, 3 bodies of state spoke with a single voice. In the Senate, Herminius of the House of the Wanderer and Talia of Netherwatch brought forward the motion to criminalise membership of the disciples of Suleiman. At the same time, through the arguments of Elagabalus as Grand Master of the Sevenfold Path, a conclave declared that all magicians should render aid by blade, spell, or mind to the people of Urizen as they hunt and kill the disciples of Suleiman and Severus of the Blinding Sun. Unsurprisingly, the Imperial Synod passed multiple statements with a greater majority, urging the faithful to take action. Over half an Imperial army's worth of Urizen military captains sweep methodically across Redoubt, Morrow, and then Zenith, visiting known temples and investigating leads provided by local spires. Many citadels are keen to lend aid in the form of information and supplies to the roving groups. When found, most disciples resolutely unsheath their eponymous weapons and make their final stand. They are quickly overwhelmed. Even those scholars who are exceptional individual combatants are no match for a squad of sentinels acting in unison. A handful have attempted to flee with varying degrees of success, but there is no doubt that the disciples of Suleiman as any kind of identifiable group has been completely demolished. The Vigilance Assembly requested that the writings of the disciples be preserved, a call which some felt ran counter to the spirit of the recent mandate enacted by longtime Cardinal Vivienne Barossa, which warned of the dangers all malign spiritual presences pose. As it was, the mandate did not get a greater majority in the General Assembly, and so many in Urizen openly question it. Ironically, a recent practice very much spearheaded by the Sword Scholars themselves and their open hostility to the Synod's authority. As it is, this excursion was one of a military nature rather than a delegation of seers looking to gather information, and little is discovered about Suleiman that is not already known. However, those involved have managed to recover several hallowed items. Anyone who took part in the Hunt the Disciples downtime action will receive a ribbon to attach to an appropriate item, ideally a weapon or a piece of jewellery. If your character would have destroyed or disposed of the item, just hand the ribbon back into God. Fallen Hero. The leader of the disciples of Suleiman, Severus of the Blinding Sun, has been captured and will be brought to Anvil for trial. Remaining groups who survived the purge have splintered into a multitude of sub-factions who are primarily focused on survival. Severus of the Temple of the Blinding Sun has been captured. Commonly regarded as the de facto leader of the disciples of Suleiman, it is undeniable that he was their most prominent scholar and teacher, the best known by far and widely respected by other disciples. He is being brought to Anvil to face trial and presumably execution at the winter solstice as an unrepentant member of the disciples of Suleiman. Despite his membership of the recently outlawed order, the Synod are yet to pass judgment on whether he has committed any crimes against the faith. Aspar's request for a writ of excommunication received heavy support, but did not get the legally required greater majority. In some ways, the timing of his arrival in Anvil is poor, since it coincides with the release of new guidance from magistrates on how to imply imperial law when prosecuting a religious crime. Given the circumstances, the magistrates have indicated that they will make Severus available to the Synod for inquisition, should they wish to do so, before the trial is conducted. Severus has not made any comment on whether he intends to seek a member of the Synod to plead clemency on his behalf, though it seems astonishingly unlikely. With Severus captured and the majority of the disciples of Suleiman slain, some groups have attempted to flee or go into hiding. The refugees from the Temple of the Inviolate Spirit attempted to seek refuge with the Silver Flame in Cineon's Spiral, but were turned away and summarily captured. Either Kayla and her people have no sympathy for blasphemers, or perhaps they are just aware of the precarious nature of their independence. The Last Word sect attempted to flee into the Mountain of the Moon, but by the time Imperial forces arrived, they were found tied up with a brief note attached to their arbiter. In reciprocity, the people of Sark shall not intrude into Imperial matters. A handful of those who were once disciples have managed to escape Imperial justice. A lone survivor from the Fellowship of the Door, a stargazer named Valeria, was seen being escorted by a herald of Hyak into a summer regio. A dozen members of the Wayfarer's Answer Temple have definitely hidden somewhere in Spiral, possibly by taking advantage of the statues offered by Sung to support Urizeni still living there. Finally, the 10 Echoes, a small coven from Lustri, fled north, apparently heading for the Sarengrave, or even further. Urizen is second perhaps only to Dawn in prevalence of heralds of the Eternals being seen among citizens. Some fear that there will have been disciples who will have used a certain ritual from Urizen lore to turn to the one Eternal who is always willing to help. So far there is no evidence of that happening, but nobody can completely rule it out. The Forge. News of the sword originally intended for Suleiman has spread far and wide across the high peaks. The words of the Synod have provoked interest in the fate of such an important piece of Urizen history. The Urizen National Assembly have let it be known that Damakan's wisdom, the blade crafted for Suleiman by the legendary Urizeni artisan, has been reforged. Had the disciples of Suleiman endured, they might have sought to reclaim the false paragon's heirloom, but now they are scattered and broken. That threat is gone. With the sword scholars turning their back on Suleiman, this relic has lost some of its religious importance to the people of the High Peaks. That said, it is still a masterwork sword created by Damakan herself, a link to Urizen history from a time before the Empire was even forged. As a result, people are interested to know what will become of Damakan's legacy now that the disciples of Suleiman are dealt with. Damakan's forge was recently moved by the Brother of Wizards and has become part of the Crucible of Fate. If Damakan's wisdom were to be made part of the regalia of the architect of the Crucible, it would boost the prestige of the architect and make it clear that they were Damakan's heir. It would ensure the importance of the Crucible as an ideal location for a memorial if Damakan were ever to be recognised by the Imperial Synod, and make it easier to research Damakan's life. One enthusiastic young architect suggests that one day it might be expanded into a full runeforge. However, they were quickly chided for getting too far ahead of themselves. Of course, the sword could be made the regalia of any Urizen national position. It might even be better to create a new title, one specifically designed to bear the sword and preserve Damakan's legacy. However, it is not just the Urizen who are interested in the sword. Two Eternals have both shown interest upon hearing that the true sword has been recovered. She who counts the ripples is a noted collector of items of historical significance, liking to keep such artifacts safe from the erosion of time. The Abyssal Lord notes with approval that the sword's wielder is part of the Eye of the Wanderer, a coven more than capable of casting her ritual. Should they do so and submit the question, what might Leviathan offer us for Damakan's wisdom? And include a few suggestions of what they might be interested in, the Deepest One will make an exception to her usual rule in order to briefly discuss what boon he might offer in exchange for allowing him to become the sword's custodian. On the other hand, the Ashen Knight has also expressed an interest in acquiring this artifact, one that was meant for one of the greatest haters of Imperial history. The herald relaying this information notes that the court were apparently rather fond of the previous general of the Citadel Guard, Nicasia Avicia of Phoenix Reach, and they would be more than happy to be friends with a new Urizen general of similar temperament. If General Clytemnestra joins the party going to the parley with a thrice-cursed court, and offers the sword to the burnt steward as a gift, he will provide the ritual text for Bond of Thorn and Razor in return, as a gift for her people. Imperial records make no mention of what this ritual does, only that Zakalwe clearly takes some issue with it. Whatever happens, the sword currently belongs to Clytemnestra. Unless she had stolen it from someone protected by Imperial law, the Constitution grants her freedom to do with it as she wishes. Be it to take advantage of any of those opportunities, continue to bear it as a personal weapon, or indeed mount it on her mantelpiece, as Tom Drake famously did with his forebear's heirloom. The Act of the National Assembly has aroused a great deal of interest in the heirloom, but only Clytemnestra has the power to decide what happens to it now.